Okay, be sure that you have answered your bell work question after watching the intro video, okay? So let's watch it and get that done. See if this works, okay?
So let's say you have to read an incredibly long email from your boss that you have to finish before the big meeting.
Commercials. Okay, so answer that bell work question. It's about the macromolecules, right? So you're gonna have to think back, and based upon your test questions or test results, you might need to think a little harder because they are obviously related to what we're about to learn in this new unit. And knowing more about macromolecules, you'll understand more about how all the stuff we're going to learn now comes into play, okay? All right, and can function based upon those macromolecules. Because all these things that you see in this drawing or this artist's rendering of a cell, they're all either proteins or lipids or carbohydrates or nucleic acids. So we're all right there. Okay. So cell theory. We are on slide 2 of your notes. Excuse me. Now, it's a theory, right? Theories are based on facts, correct? So, many years ago, I'm not going to go, we don't have to know too much about the names and the dates or anything like that, but we do have to know that people, humans, okay, had to deal a lot with this, with little technology. Really until the invention of the microscope, which is where this entire series of notes ends, and then we start, when we go into some lessons using the microscopes over there, they didn't know much about it. They didn't know much about the cell. They didn't see any of these things happening until that first microscope was used. So, and this is what the theory states. These three main statements. All organisms are made of cells, one or more. Cells are the basic unit of life, not an atom. An atom is the basic unit of matter, all matter, including, this. My watch. These are atoms. Cells are the basic building blocks of life. In one cell, there could be 1 million atoms, okay? And then cells come from other cells. A cell just can't appear out of nowhere. A cell has to come from another cell. Cell structure. So you have to write these down in your notes on slide 3. These are the life functions, among others that we don't have to know about, but these are the life functions that are carried on by cells, okay? Respiration. You may think breathing is respiration. That's part of it, but what they mean here is cellular respiration. That is breaking apart a glucose molecule and getting energy out of it, okay, and turning it into carbon dioxide and water. It's the opposite of photosynthesis. Now, reproduction, that's obvious. Cells needing, you get a boo-boo, a cut, a scrape, a broken arm, your cells have to reproduce themselves to make new ones for growth and repair, right? But also for reproduction in the organism itself. So there's another kind, we're going to talk about this in the next unit, which is cellular reproduction, okay? But so don't worry about that right now. Just know that that's one of the functions, okay? Synthesis, obviously making new things. We talked about that in our macromolecule biochemical unit. Nutrition, food for energy, to move and to think and to grow. Moving around, transport. I said growth already. Regulation, that's that homeostasis word we talked about in the last unit. That means keeping everything stable. Keeping your body temperature stable, keeping your hormone and enzyme levels stable and all that stuff. Keeping even the things like the oil in your skin stable. And excretion, that's getting rid of wastes. And not necessarily, what you think of getting rid of wastes, like peeing and pooping, okay? Cellular wastes, which we're going to talk about in here as well. So all cells are surrounded by this thing called the cell membrane. And we talked about that when we talked about the lipid bilayer of lipids that have a hydrophilic and hydrophobic ends. And they're filled with this substance, this watery fluid called cytoplasm. Anything that says cyto in front of it refers to a cell. So just remember that. Most cells, and we're going to define some of this later, this is just an introduction, have a nucleus, the eukaryotes. Eukaryotes are plants and animals. Every plant you see and every animal you see, whether it's one cell, like a planktonic creature floating in the ocean or something like that, or in a pond, to a giant whale or a great big tree, they're all eukaryotes. And that means they have a nucleus inside. That means that their DNA is bound up in a little protective sac inside the cell. So the cell itself is a protective sac, and floating around inside the cell is another protective sac. That's the nucleus, floating around in that cytoplasm. Now, bacteria do not. Bacteria are called prokaryotes. Prokaryotes. And their DNA just kind of floats around inside. It's not bound up in its own little protective ball of lipids. So here is that whole eukaryote, prokaryote definition, okay? Eu rhymes with do. They do have a nucleus. That's this blue thing, okay? Pro rhymes with no. This is how you're going to remember this for the next test. But again, if you never read these notes again after today, you'll never have studied and you will do bad on the next test, which is not going to happen, right? So prokaryotes, like a bacteria, don't have a nucleus. Their DNA is just floating around inside their cell walls, inside their cellular framework. And again, you rhymes with do have a nucleus. You do, pro, no. Say it 7 times, you won't forget it. You do, pro, no. You do, pro, no. Okay? And you were supposed to finish labeling this diagram in your notes, because it says so right there. And you probably already have done it while I was yapping up here. Okay? So let's take a look at this basic cell structure video. See if we can get that up and running. Skip ad.
The cell is the basic unit of all organisms. It is made of protoplasm. The membrane is double-walled with selective permeability, allowing water and other material in and out of the cell. The protoplasm inside the cell is cytoplasm, composed mainly of water, and structures called organelles. The control of the cell is the nucleus that contains the genetic material, DNA. The nuclear membrane is a double-walled structure with pores that allow material in and out of the nucleoplasm. Nucleoplasm is the protoplasm inside the nucleus containing DNA and ribosomes. The DNA and ribosomes are arranged in a loose and diffuse state called chromatin. During cell division, the chromatin condenses to form short, rod-like structures called chromosomes. Outside the nucleus are the organelles. The mitochondria is the site where glucose is converted to ATP, which the cells use for energy. The equation illustrates how mitochondria convert glucose into ATP, carbon dioxide, and water, cellular respiration. Lysosomes digest stored food, build and repair cellular components, and destroy weakened cell components. The endoplasmic reticulum, or ER, is the transport system for the cell that brings material from the cell membrane to the nuclear membrane. 2 types of ER include smooth and rough, which has ribosomes. Ribosomes are responsible for protein synthesis. Compounds secreted by the cells are stored and concentrated in the Golgi apparatus. Centrioles form spindle fibers during cell division to guide the duplicated chromosomes to the newly formed cells.
Okay, so they said a lot of things in that video. A lot of vocabulary. We're going to spread that out kind of over 2 units, all the stuff that you heard in there. So that was, again, we are just doing the introduction right now. So if you feel like you're taking in too much information, take a deep breath and just take it 1 slide at a time, okay? All right, so how are cells organized in all living things? Well, in unicellular organisms, all of their life functions take place in 1 cell. 1 cell. Whereas in multicellular organisms like us, we have a multitude of different kinds of cells muscle cells and skin cells and bone cells and nerve cells all working together to make us function and stay alive. But unicellular, uni meaning one, like a unicycle has one wheel, right? Okay, and multi means many, uni means one. They have to do it all with one cell. So it's pretty amazing. Here are some examples of, and you're supposed to label them in your notes, a bacteria. Not all bacteria have a squiggly tail like that. We'll define what that is later in the notes. Maybe not today, but maybe next time. Yeast, which is what you put in bread to make it rise. Algae, which you can find probably growing on the campus somewhere, like green stuff, but it comes in different colors. Most of the oxygen on the planet doesn't come from trees, like in the Amazon or the forests of Canada or whatever. It comes from algae that live in the ocean. Most of it, just over half. Amoebas, those things that look like little microscopic blobs. Paramecium, people have called this a hairy slipper, but it's only one cell, and it's got these little hairs all over it, which we'll define later. And something called a euglena. A euglena is another one-celled unicellular organism that has this whip-like tail, kind of like a sperm, whip, and it propels it forward and make it swim. Very small example of the many different kinds of unicellular organisms. All right, so here's the multicellular. Like people, this is actually a real human person. A human person? What other kind of person is there, Mr. Keene? An alien person. No, this is a show that actually travels the world, I think, and it's called Bodies. I saw it in Tampa 5 or 6 years ago. It's really cool. It's got actual cadavers that are preserved in different shapes and things. And you can see all the anatomy. It's really wild. It's kind of freaky. It's a little like horror show, but it's like science. So anyway, that's what this picture is. So again, multicellular are many cells. We got that. And again, like I said before, they're specialized. All the cells have their own special function. This is, you can see muscle cells here and ligaments and bone cells. And they all work together to make the organism survive. 60 trillion cells in your body. 60 trillion. It's almost impossible to think of a number that big, okay? And these cells are organized into things called tissues, organs, organ systems, and then the organism. And I'll show you what that means in a minute, or in a second. Okay. So you have to fill this in, all right? But here I'm going to discuss it so you can understand where the pieces fit in here, okay? So these are the levels of organization of a living thing, of a multicellular organism. So you've got the cell, the single cell. The cells, the same kinds of cells come together to make tissues, okay? And in this case, you've got leaf tissue, or not leaf tissue, but epidermal tissue on the leaf. And here you've got what appears to be cardiac muscle, okay? Cardiac muscle. So this is a cardiac muscle cell. This is a epithelial cell or skin cell of a leaf of a tree, okay? And then the skin cells, that tissue comes together to make an organ, and in a plant, it's a leaf, and in an animal like a horse, it's a heart. So these muscle cells, these cardiac muscle cells, come together to make a heart, and then the heart comes together to make the organ system. That's the heart's the organ, and then put the heart with the other pieces. The vascular system, all the arteries and veins, and now you've got the vascular system, the system of organs. Here you've got the stem for a plant, and then you add the roots and you have the whole organism, and you add the rest of this organ systems together, and you've got the whole organism. So it's cells, tissues, organs, organ systems, and organisms, and that's what goes here, okay? A group of cells with common structure and function. A group of tissues working together. And some examples. A group of organs functioning together to carry out. And circulatory system, nervous system, reproductive system, skeletal system, okay? And then, of course, finally, you have the living thing, which is the organism. Got it? That's the levels of organization of a multicellular organism. And there are the answers. You should have already written them down, but they're up there just to check your answers. Okay. So, the specialization of these cells that are being grouped into tissues, let's check this out. Obviously, the cells are going to have different shapes because they have different jobs. So here you have, like I said, the epidermal cell, the outside tissue layer of a leaf. And then you've got cells that have chloroplasts in them. That's what makes a plant be able to use sunlight to make food. Photo, light, synthesis, make, okay? And then phloem cells, that's remember we learned in capillary action how the xylem tubes of a plant carry the water up. Phloem cells carry things down. Xylem up, phloem flows down. We'll learn more about that when we learn about plants. And a root hair cell. And all of them together, so they're all specialized, all of them together, they're coordinated to make the whole plant work. Now cells, the individual cells, have their own system within them made up of things called organelles. So you've got an organ like a lung or a heart or a humerus bone, okay? A cell, one single cell, has very similar structures inside of it, and they're tiny organs, hence the term organelle, like a tiny organ. You could think of it that way. And they all have their own separate functions. We learned about a little bit of them in the last little video that we just watched. Each one has a separate function inside the cell. Okay? So you're going to complete this table in your notes as well. You're going to use the diagram that we just saw above and your knowledge of biology. So, here's a diagram. It's something that transports oxygen. What is the human cell that does that? What human cell does that? And if you're thinking blood cell, you're correct. But there are different kinds of blood cells, so make sure you have red blood cell, because white blood cells and platelets and other types of things don't transport oxygen. Okay, what cell is this that sends signals from your fingertips, for example, to your brain? What cell do we call that? And if you said nerve cell, then you are correct. Or another name for nerve cell is neuron. But okay, so that's a nerve cell or a neuron. I'd write down the neuron in parentheses nerve cell. They're the same thing. And I just kind of gave this one away before. Fights disease, that's your white blood cell or your leukocyte. They're also called leukocytes, but white blood cells. And then covers surfaces like the outside of the body. You could say skin cell and it would be correct, but the actual term is epithelial cell. I mentioned that word before. This is your epidermis. And then you've got different layers of dermis, which are all referring to skin. But epithelial. And you also have epithelial cells in the lining of your mouth. You could actually take a popsicle stick and gently scrape the inside of your cheek, right here, inside, not outside. And then you can put it on a slide in the microscope. We can't do this because of communicable diseases, okay? We can't put things in our mouth and put them on equipment. That's gross. We used to be able to back in the day. But I don't know, maybe you have your own microscope at home. I don't know. You can actually look at your cells under the microscope. And then finally, it helps the organism move by contracting and relaxing, okay, that would be your muscle cells. So these are just examples of cells that have that specificity, that specialized function in a multicellular organism, okay? All right, we're on slide 10, and we are going to get to, on this first part, let's see, slide 17. So we only have seven slides left after this, okay? Now, cells contain a variety of regulatory mechanisms to maintain what that word again, that homeostasis word. And the funny thing is that homeo, and this is Homer Simpson, so ha ha ha. That homeostasis means balance. Balance in the body, balance in the cell itself. Different level of balance. It's also called dynamic equilibrium. So dynamic means changing, but changing in order to maintain stability. So if one thing starts to get out of whack, the system comes into play and fixes it back to equilibrium. That's what the dynamic equilibrium. Dynamic means changing. So here, we've got a change, okay? We've got a stimulus, which is, it's cold, okay? And then that hits your brain, your sensors, your sensory part of your body, which says, oh, I need to maintain equilibrium because of the dynamic event. And so I'm going to respond by shivering. And that's my body's response to maintain. And shivering moves your muscles, which creates energy, heat, and warms your body back up again. So it's a feedback loop kind of thing. And so in order to maintain homeostasis, it goes through this dynamic equilibrium. A change, too hot. Too hot, okay? So your body senses that and then checks it, okay, with that feedback loop and makes you sweat. Your body makes you sweat. And that it will maintain, which cools your body off. The evaporating water from your skin cools your body off. So the cells in your body can detect this external stimuli, that's plural for stimulus, cold, heat, pain, hunger, any other number of things that affect the body, okay? Fear, other things, stimulus, and it will release chemicals or hormones, which are chemicals, or, actions in your body, in your cells, that will maintain that homeostasis, okay? Here's a test yourself. You're going to do this obviously on your own, but just know that it is there and you have to go back to it. And you're going to be using prokaryotic cell, which is no nucleus, right? So that's like a bacteria. Eukaryotic cell, you do have a nucleus. That's animals and plants, or all the cells. Those are the answers for that. Okay. So this is the next slide, slide 12. Cell membrane, plasma, also called the plasma membrane or the lipid bilayer. And again, we have talked about this when we talked about lipids and the hydrophobic and the hydrophilic ends of the lipid molecules, okay? So they protect the cell from the outside environment. They form a barrier, a double wall of protection, allowing some things in, good things, and getting rid of bad things, okay? And not allowing bad things in. They control, like I just said, they control which molecules can enter the cell and which ones can leave, like the waste products. They maintain homeostasis. So they maybe keep the cell from drying out or keeps the internal conditions of the cell constant. And then they recognize chemical signals from outside, like hormones and things called neurotransmitters. These are chemicals that enable your neurons, your nerve cells, to talk to each other in a very rapid fashion, actually. And oftentimes, taking illegal drugs will mess up your neurotransmitters and make you see things that aren't there and other stuff. And crazy, make you jump off a building because you think you can fly and crazy stuff like that. So stay away from things that mess up your neurotransmitters. The cell membrane is a semi-permeable. Semi-permeable? Okay, to permeate something means to break through it. To permeate. So semi-permeable means that only some things can permeate. Only some things can go in and only some things can go out, okay? It's selectively permeable. And so I just kind of told you the answer what semi-permeable means. So the membrane is a two-layered structure. Oh yeah, only some things get through. That's the answer for that. The cell membrane is a two-layered structure made up of lipids and proteins. So here's the lipids. There's no proteins in this picture. And there's your phospholipid molecule. Remember, it is a hydrocarbon. This is a long chain of the black part of carbon atoms chained together. So my fist is a carbon atom, my fist is a carbon atom, and then here's the bonds that are bonding it together, all right? And then coming off of those carbon atoms, these blue things, those are your hydrogens, remember? The long chain of hydrocarbons, and together with the end, they make, and this would be a hydrophilic end, and this would be a hydrophobic end. And so they come together and they make the whole wall, and they pile up like this, and they make a sphere, a ball. And embedded in there are the proteins that the notes are talking about, which I'm going to show you in a minute. So here, these are proteins embedded in the phospholipid bilayer that allow certain chemicals to go in and other chemicals to go out, and stopping other chemicals from going in. So there's a protein. That's the lipid. That's the lipid bilayer, because now you've got, you can see how it's two of them, two layers of them. Bi means two. A receptor protein, so a protein that will receive something for passage or for just to transmit a signal even. Okay, and they're both proteins. So let's make sure you get those in your notes. Okay. The cytoplasm. Almost done, a couple slides left. This is that watery material, we mentioned it before, that fills the space between the cell membrane, which is this outer layer here, and these are the organelles, the things that are inside. And all of them they don't really float around as much as they're just in there. They're actually held together by a whole bunch of interconnecting rods, which we'll talk about in a minute. It's called the cytoskeleton. I mean, yes, things can move around in there, in between them, but those cytoskeleton rods are kind of like the girders of a skyscraper, of a building, the metal poles, that you always see being built first, and they build the walls around it. So these are all kind of held into place with those things. And it contains organelles. Obviously, these are the organelles I just spoke of. And many chemical reactions take place in the cytoplasm itself. Not necessarily in the organelles, which we'll talk about each individual one of these over the next few days. And like I said, circulation of materials can go around. So things can move in there, but everything's kind of held, kind of in place. So the nucleus, nuclei plural. If I say nuclei, I'm talking about multiple nucleuses. That's the control center, like the brain or the head office, like Miss Castellano's office. Okay, that's the nucleus of the school. And it stores information in the form of DNA, deoxyribonucleic acid. Now, I'm not saying that you need to know that just yet, but you do have to know what DNA means and how to say it, I believe, in the next unit. So anyway, so here's this whole thing is inside the cell. You had a picture of it before. So it's kind of like a cell in a cell, but it's not a cell by itself. It has its own function. It's an organelle. Like you couldn't have, your heart by itself. You couldn't have your brain by itself. You couldn't have your skeleton by itself because the organism would die, right? Well, if you took the nucleus out of a eukaryotic cell, the eukaryotic cell would die. So it's an essential part of it, and it's inside. But it has its own nuclear envelope, which is a lipid bilayer, just like the external part of the cell also. Okay, so this is where we're going to stop. Here are other cellular organelles, and we're going to talk about all of these, the Golgi, this endoplasmic reticulum. There's two different kinds, ER for short, because this is a big word. Ribosomes are very tiny. Those little black dots are those things. The nucleus, we just talked about that. That's what the DNA is. The cell membrane, we talked about that. Lysosomes are pretty much the garbage, the sanitary workers. They come in and they get rid of the bad stuff. Vacuoles are for storage. Centrioles, mentioned it in that video before, but that's really in the next unit. That's about cell reproduction. Cytoskeleton, we mentioned that. That's kind of like this lattice work that's holding everything together. And then the mitochondria, that's the powerhouse of the cell. This is where the glucose is sent to make power. ATP, it's called adenosine triphosphate, which we'll get to in the future also. And so these are just some of them. And we're going to talk about each one of these. Now this game here, okay, if we click on this, will it bring us to, well, it's in you, no, it won't. If you go to Google Classroom, you can click on that link, or you can just type it in. I don't know, but it's in your notes. It's right here. I think I pasted it into your notes. Yes, I did, okay? So it's a game. And you can start it now. I don't know if you're gonna finish. It looks like we have about 15 minutes of class left, maybe. I don't think you'll be able to finish the whole game in 15 minutes, and I don't think it saves it for you. So, but you can start it and try it and mess around with it right now. That's what I want you to do. So in your Chromebooks, open up your Chromebooks or your laptops, and go to the site. And so the directions are in your notes. I'm looking at them right now. You go to start a new game. You follow the on-screen instructions. You have to read all the pop-ups. Don't just click, some video games, like the character's talking and you're like, yeah, whatever, character. I don't care what you have to say. I just want to keep playing, right? Not in this. This is a school game. So you have to read. Yeah, you have to read every pop-up that comes up. Otherwise, you're doing this for nothing, okay? And we need to do this for something. It's because it's very confusing with all the new vocabulary. I've only introduced you to it. You're gonna explore all of these organelles in this pretty cool game. You have to go through all four missions, and then in numerical order, don't skip around, 1, 2, 3, 4. Finally, at the end, your score sheet, you need to take a screenshot or a picture with your cell phone, okay, so you can get a grade. Copy and paste the score sheet into a document and submit that as the last page of these notes. So you're going to keep it somewhere safe, and you're going to submit it when you submit these notes. Does that make sense? Okay. So that is our part 1 of our notes. We will continue part 2 in a couple days.